everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. We have a special episode today. I'm Sepehr Vakil, your co-host.
And I'm your co-host, Mike Knight.
And we're
Welcome to another episode of A Professor and a Comedian. Welcome to a bar.
Yeah, please like and subscribe as you listen. We have a special episode today. We are here with Dr. Beth Tipton from Northwestern University. So today we have a special episode because Beth and I are colleagues, and we've actually had a chance to work together on a few things and be in the same spaces. And I've come to realize her celebrity and her status in the field. So just a very quick intro to Dr. Dr. Beth Tipton, who's a professor of statistics and data science, and also a professor by courtesy in human development and social policy, which is my department, or within SESP, the school that I'm located within. Beth is also the co-director of the Statistics for Evidence-Based Policy and Practice Center and a faculty fellow in the Institute for Policy Research, known as IPR, at Northwestern University, amongst probably many other things that I'm leaving out. Beth, welcome to PCWB.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
Oh.
So Mike, I'm going to launch it to you to get us started. We had a chance to kind of prep with Beth about all things evidence and research and statistics. And we've been doing the last few episodes. We've been really kind of focused on the context of post-election. And I know we're going to get into some of that, I imagine, and what the role of evidence is. But I guess where should we start?
I don't know. That's just the job title itself. I'm always fascinated by people who dedicate their professional life to numbers, because everything's in numbers. So while we're doing this podcast, I wish Beth was my next door neighbor. I'd try and get the over-under on the playoffs for every single sport. Like, that's how my brain thinks when I hear statistics. I'm like, Beth, I'm gonna go to Atlantic City. I need you. I need you on my FaceTime.
I'm laughing because I know like nothing about sports ball, as I like to call it, right? Like, my husband's always appalled. He's always saying, "Oh, you should. Oh, you know all these numbers. You should be able to do stuff with sports." And I'm like, I don't know anything about sports.
In my mind, you're either right on the edge of supervillain or superhero. Like, you've got special powers if you're like an expert on statistics. But if you could you kind of lay out maybe from your time doing it, like, what do people maybe get wrong, or maybe like what's kind of misconceptions or what the job is if I was a 4-year-old?
Yeah, okay. So I think what people get wrong is that most of the time, I'm excited that you think statistics sound so fun, because most of the time when I introduce myself at a party or to somebody, that I'm meeting, and I say I'm a statistician, they say, "Oh, I took a stats class once. It was terrible." And then I don't really know where to go from there. So I think statistics is around us. Data is around us. We quantify everything. We want to know how much of things, how many, and it matters. So I think I'll back up and say, what do I do, or what is statistics? It's the measurement of things in society, right? The history of the field is that the word statistics comes out of kind of census, government counting of people. And that you can think of that as the early beginning of the modern field of statistics. But we use statistics everywhere. My part of statistics that I'm really interested in is causality, and understanding if interventions, intervention might sound like a bad word, but like a big word, I guess. So I just mean any program or policy or transformation or anything where you think you are changing something. I want to know if your idea or your theory that, like, I developed this thing and it's really cool and it's supposed to change society in all these great ways, does it actually do that? And that's kind of my area. I think it's an interesting area because, again, everywhere around us, people are saying, you should do this, you should take this herbal supplement, you should take this drug, you should build a new school, you should, these are all changes to society. And we want to know, when we're making those decisions, is it worth it? Does it actually do what it says it does? Because a lot of things that we think work don't work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. And I know some time has passed, not to jump right into the fire. I know some time has passed, but there was that thing in New York with the CEO. So like when I was mentioning like when I hear statistics or somebody's good with that, and that sounds like supervillain or superhero to me. It just seems like that's so much information that you can have on a company, on a society, on a country. And I mean, what comes to mind, again, it was a little while back, but there was the New York CEO for the healthcare that was gunned down. But they were talking about statistics wise, like his company, and this is all Beth. Come on, my grades. Get out of here. You don't need a statistician for that. They were bad. But my understanding is that their company in particular, they were declining claims. That's the common, that's the talk in
That's the narrative.
the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when somebody's in the position like that, because they would have to have consulted somebody that handled the numbers, and somebody crunched it and said, "Hey, if we cut this out and that, we'll save so much money." Is this kind of like a lawyer job where it's like, okay, I'm gonna take that case, but whoa, boy, this is gonna weigh on me.
Oh, that's a great
How do you
question.
apply the tools? How do you apply the
Yeah.
tools of your
Okay. So,
discipline?
fortunately, yeah. Boy, that's a tough one. And partly what I'm thinking is they have in-house people, right? Like they have people whose jobs are like analyzing data in the office
Mm-hmm.
and probably thinking about this obviously with finance and econ in mind,
Mm-hmm.
economics, um, really making cost benefit claims as ways of improving profits or predicting who to take, who to
Mm-hmm.
cover, who not to cover. All of that is in the realm of kind of our new version of statistics, which is data science, thinking about prediction and profit and things like that in businesses. And I do think there's a lot of ethical dilemmas in that, right? In all of these predictive sorts of problems. Uh, Fortunately for my own work, it's not where my work sits. My own work is much more in an area that is a little slower and not so much used in business. In fact, I like to say that statisticians, at least in general, historically, um, are really cautious people. We're not the people who come in and say like you should predict this and do this really fast.
Mm-hmm.
We're often like the like hemming and hawing over like, well, have we think about it really carefully? Like how much error is in this? Like we should be, you should be really cautious in this because we're really worried about error. We're worried fundamentally about how much error is in data and
Mm-hmm.
quantifying that error. But it kind of gets mixed in because statistician gets mixed in with economists, which gets mixed in with finance, mixed in with all of these number things.
Mm-hmm.
And our particular take on it tends to be much more about quantifying uncertainty, less about, I think, making the predictions.
Interesting.
And Beth, you do a lot of your hemming and hawing and and application of the tools of your discipline in the space of education, right?
I do, yeah.
Can can I ask you? I've always wanted to know, like you. So you have it. I think to Mike's point, you have this incredible tool set, right?
Yeah.
And I want to actually get to like data science versus stats and how can our
Mhm.
listeners understand the differences and overlap there. But before we do that, I'm just curious. So like as someone who has these tools to your at your disposal, you've chosen to apply them in the field of education. Is it because you're a parent? I know, and I know that about you, or is it because you've always been interested in improving the educational system in the US? Or how do you think about like why did you choose education as at least one of the areas or domains that you apply your work?
That's a great question. I have been interested in education for a long time. So I think some of it is because I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, and I have, the life that I live is because I had all of these educational opportunities. But I also grew up in a fairly under-resourced community. And so that always is something that sort of, I guess, was an early an early experience that I've carried with me. And then through my husband, who he at one point did Teach for America, we lived just outside of Gallup, New Mexico on the Navajo reservation for 3 years in my early 20s. And he taught elementary school. We lived right next to the elementary school, and I worked in town. I worked for the Girl Scouts. I worked with developmental education at the local college. And so I just had a lot of experience in education and felt like these were systems that were not serving everybody, that could be serving more people, and that had the potential to transform lives, like being able, learning things, being able to read and write and be a good citizen. And so they felt like an application area that I was really interested in contributing to. And what I learned in all of those jobs and experiences is that like the thing I like to do is math and crunching numbers and data. And so it felt like this is a way to combine them. Something I'm fairly good at, like, and something that I really care about. And that's sort of how I landed in education, which I think of as like a version of a larger field called social statistics. Like it's the intersection of social science, people who are interested in social science and the social world, but their job is really developing the methods to help the scientists along. So I always think I'm like one person away, like in the sense that the way I contribute to education research is often I help a scientist, or I develop methods that help scientists do the things that they do to contribute to education research. So I'm kind of the support system in some ways.
Let me do a quick follow-up because I'm just curious, because I'm also in education, as you know, Mike. What are the big interventions from your vantage point within the public education system that need some more evidence, right? Or need some, some deeper claim? Like what are the big issues that are being experimented around?
Oh man, and now this is like the fusion of my interest and my experience as a mother, right? So watching my kids, I feel like since COVID, I've just had such a window into their worlds, partly because ed tech has kind of taken over, right? So I suddenly we have, my kids are on Google Classroom, they've got IXL, they've got, I don't want to just call out any one of these, but they've got so many of these different programs that they're using. And I always wonder, like, what is the evidence base for these? Is this actually, are these actually good? Because the promise is in all of these tools is that they are individuate instruction, and that by individuating instruction, this is better than a whole classroom instruction. But it's not clear to me that that's always true. And sometimes when I've tried to dig into, websites of companies or places, it's not clear that they actually have the evidence that this is true. But, so for example, something that people in many of these products will do is they'll talk about the effect or how big the learning gains are for kids who use it a lot. But it's a real problem, right? Like you're an online reading program. If you say for kids who use this a lot and spend, over 100 minutes a week or something on this, they improve their reading. Well, if you just pause for a minute and you think, well, who are the kids that can spend 100 minutes a week on it? Like, why are they on there? Is it because they were already reading and we've just dropped them into the teacher is having them read on here while they work with other kids? Is it because these were the kids who were motivated? How do we know that is this really working for all kids and the kids who really need this, or is this just working for the kids who were already going to do well? So to me, the big question is about educational technologies, which are just being picked up left and right with school districts, and how well,
especially now,
I feel like post-COVID, you just like opened the floodgate and there's just nothing but online products at this point. And I'd love to know if they actually work.
And those decisions are made really oftentimes, by district leadership or school boards, sometimes in partnership together, with very little input from the community and definitely very little input from, evidence-based experts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're being sold products, right? So that's the other thing is like there's a lot of selling of these products, and the people who sell things, of course, use statistics in ways that make it sound good. You know, oh, if you use it a lot, it works. If we did a study and it works, and then you like dig in, of course, and you find the study was only with fifth graders and not with kindergartners, right? So there's all sorts of ways in which people use the language of statistics to sell things to us, and the language of evidence to sell things to us. But that if you are not really sincere sometimes, or are just, even when they're being sincere, they're really extrapolating, like they're going way beyond what their data actually tells you.
So numbers can lie too.
I like to say it's not that the numbers lie, it's the people lie. People lie with numbers.
I might have
You can
even,
lie with words, you can lie with numbers.
absolutely. I might have even asked you before, but through the course of your career, like, was there anything that you learned that stood out to you? Like, I didn't know that 8 out of 10 giraffes had no kneecaps. Like, was there anything that like just you saw it, or even in the social, even in a more serious realm, or
Oh my
anything that you
gosh.
came across and you were like, I did not know that. Now things are different now that I know that.
Oh my gosh. So I have to say that now that you've asked me for a specific thing, I can't remember anything I know in my
Of
entire
course.
life. Right. Like nothing. I don't know anything actually. Um, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pull out a specific number for you. But I do think that is the thing that statistics can offer us actually, is that
Right.
often we have beliefs about the way the world works or the way the world is. And if you have good data, that data can often help you see if like what your personal theory of how it is actually true. Um, so I wish I could come up with a good
That's
example.
what throws me off, because it feels like if you're studying statistics, like it's like I'd almost be afraid that you John Wick things, because you know how John Wick can use everything in his environment. Like, if you know the numbers for everything, then you're
Yeah.
gonna have it on. Like, when do you ever get to turn it off? Like
Uh,
are
well,
you
here's
ever in like Walmart and you see a kid with like nothing but overalls and no socks and go, statistically, he's not gonna make it.
I wish that I were like a walking statistical calculator. Unfortunately, strangely, my interest in statistics is in the formulas for the statistics more so than in the actual numbers. So I'm actually remarkably bad at remembering
Right.
the specific results of any study. Like I've been involved in various studies. There was a period I was involved in a couple of papers in mindset and growth mindset. And so I was interviewed several times on podcasts about growth mindset. And every time I was like, I had to like stick to some notes because I was afraid, first of all, that I would even get what growth mindset was wrong.
Yeah.
And that I would get like what the results were wrong, because that's not what was interesting to me in the study. That's not what my part of the study was. My part of the study was like really nerding out over the study design and how we designed the study, and what the study had the potential to answer at a more abstract level than the specific results. So I actually am very bad at knowing like individual statistics, which is why
Yeah.
like I'm not of any use to anybody in sports or gambling or anything like that. I'm more like always thinking about what's possible to know, or what, or how you would know, or I'll give you the other version of this, because I work in causal inference. I'm always wanting to know what the counterfactual is. So in the idea in causal inference is, if we want to know if you should take Advil for your headache or not, the way we think about that is there's two versions of reality, one in which you took the Advil and one in which you didn't take the Advil. And we can never observe both of those versions of reality. So we're going to have to figure out how to collect data or do a study that can get us as close to like imputing what those two versions of reality would be for you.
Oh, that's like the cat in the box with the poison.
Tell me more.
What is it? Schillinger's cat. What is it? Schrodinger's
Yes.
cat. There you go.
Yes. Yeah, very much like that. Right. Yeah.
Mike,
so the idea
always.
right.
Well, I mean, so this definitely counts as like STEM, right? It was, and I think traditionally the statistics on STEM is that it's more of a boys' club. Is that still the case, or?
Yep, it still is. STEM is still a boys' club, and I mean, depressingly so.
So I'm a young woman coming out of high school. I'm looking to get into STEM, and I get to sit down with you, and you can give me the heads up on what to expect and give me some motivation. What do you think what you would say, or just to break into that
Yeah.
to those boys clubs in general?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I have to say I'm really proud of our department. We have a new data science major and minor.
Mm.
And my understanding is that it's about 50%. So it's a huge program, like 600 undergrads, 600 or more. But it's about 50% women. And so that's so a real accomplishment, I think, and
Yeah.
speaks a lot to the people teaching in that program.
Mm-hmm.
And they're,
Is that unique, Beth? Is that unique compared to other peer institutions?
I don't know how it is to compare to other peer institutions, but I think it's fairly unique in quantitative fields for it to be that equitably distributed. I think what happens is then after that, you have to go to graduate school, or you don't have to, but like if you want to keep going in fields like this, you do. And they become more and more, more male the further up you get the chain, right? So the higher up you go, the fewer and fewer women there are. And my advice to women is like you just have to stick with it. Like you have to like stick with it. You build your community, you find people to support you. I honestly like the further up I go, there are still things and there's new things. There's new places where you're like, oh, it's really a boys' club. They think my work isn't as good. They think that I'm not as smart. It can be really, really frustrating. And so I just lean a lot on the sort of other women and trusted men in my field, to sort of reach out and help each other and feel support. And the key is to not give up. The other part is like I think that I'm always reminding people that like you don't have to be perfect at everything, that you can a C is okay. Like a C is okay sometimes. And I say that because when I first started teaching as a young professor, it was a really revolutionary thing for me. Like I had just finished my PhD program where I felt almost surprised that I got a job at the end, right? Like I'd had some really hard times in classes, and I started teaching, and I had these students. I had this male student in my class who really was lost, and he talked all the time in class. He would ask questions, and the questions would just be like really out of right field. You'd be like, no, that's not. I'd have to like redirect a lot. And then I had this couple of women in my class who
You got
were
a heckler.
like,
You got a
yeah,
heckler.
right. But then I had this couple of women in my class who were like, 99 on everything in the class. And they came to my office hours once about something. And as I said, oh, you're doing really well in the class. And they were like, I don't know. I mean, I never understand what he's saying when he asks questions. And it occurred to me that I was like, oh, he's not asking really smart questions. He's lost. But you're doing so well in the class, and he's speaking with such authority when he asks his questions that you believe he knows something you don't know, and not that he's
Interesting.
actually lost and is actually knows far less than you. And so it was just like it was one of those moments where it like made me rethink some of my own education of like maybe had I been assuming people knew more, that because they spoke with authority, than they maybe did. Like, is it possible that I had thought some people were so much better, but were actually just more arrogant, and were projecting and carrying themselves in that way?
Oh, wow. That's been my go-to move. Just put a little bass in my voice when I don't know the answer.
Act like you know something, right?
Speak with
like,
authority.
yes. Or as I like to say, channel an overconfident white man. That's like that's what you got to do. You just got to channel it.
Get you out of any ticket.
Yeah. But I think, the other part of this is like, this is not just about being a woman. It's also being an underrepresented minority in the field. There's like, there's so many versions of this. And to me, the problem is like, I wish we were talking less about how to survive this system in STEM and more about how to make STEM programs into things that everybody can thrive in. Like, why do we need to make them into such exclusive environments? Why do students need to feel to feel excluded or marginalized when they're in the programs, or that people don't think they're smart because they have different life experience and are thinking differently. Like that just feels like a real wasted opportunity. And so I wish we were having more of those conversations in general at work.
Yeah.
And there's a big push towards bringing data science into the classroom, right? That's kind of that's one of the big topics in education these days. Is like I graduated high school in 2001. So for me, my math sequence was pretty standard, right? Algebra in the 8th grade, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calculus, calculus. There wasn't really many variations or different things you could do. I mean, it was just basically the honors track or the AP track or the regular. But now there's some different options, and there's a kind of a discussion, right, happening in the field around, well, maybe not everyone needs to be on that linear path towards calculus. Maybe we can have some people opt out of algebra 2 and take data science. Like what are your thoughts on that whole experiment that's kind of rolling out? And for our listeners, like, it's kind of ironic and funny and nerdy all at the same time, but like math, Mike, I don't know how much you're aware of this, but math is one of the most political issues in education right now. Like oh my God, like the whole state of California is wrangling over literally like what math should be offered. How do you track into it? How do you, even in Evanston, where Beth and I both teach and live and are raising kids, literally there is a deeply political fight going on in terms of like what kids can take, and then are there going to be special math courses for these kids? And so how do you think about those issues, Beth? Like what's your thoughts on data science in particular?
Such a good question. Well, I would have to agree with, like, I feel like all the other people like me who are, highly educated stats, data science types. If you actually want to do data science or statistics or work with numbers, you need to know algebra. Like, like it's not an alternative. It's not like, you could either paint with the numbers over here in data science, or you could add the numbers over here in algebra. Like, they actually go together. So the foundation of how we analyze data, you could boil most of statistics down to weighted averages. They're just different ways of doing weighted averages of data. But that means I need to understand averages. You need to understand how to, you need to understand the concept of thinking about weights. And algebra is just algebraic thinking is underneath all of that. So I think that a lot of people who are have have more education in the STEM disciplines can see that telling students you can do data science, you can basically opt out of taking more algebra, which is more like, I think here's the thing. I think that when you go to the algebra geometry kind of pre-calculus kind of track, it's not immediately applicable. It doesn't, it may, especially if it's not taught well, it can seem very not immediately applicable. And yet what it is very logical. Like, it's teaching you, I think, really how to be a very careful, logical thinker, which, whether you do the math again or not, that sort of in itself is important.
That's besides the point, but that's a tough sell.
It's a really,
I can see Mike as a 10th grader being like, what is this for? How am I going to use this?
Yeah.
And then we got to tell Mike, it's just going to help you think.
Yeah, I know.
I say, statistically speaking, I am supposed to be at home right now.
That's exactly right. So on the other hand, there's data science, which looks really cool, and like you can analyze data, but you're only if you skipped that other part, you can only go so far with it, right? You're going to be able to do some basics. It also requires logic and deep thinking, because what I don't want somebody coming out of data science thinking is, oh, we just crunch some numbers. That's it. We just crunch some numbers and here's the results. Like, underneath that, how you got your data, where the data came from. There's a lot of actually like really big, logical conundrums in this of how you make arguments with data that is also important. So I should say I don't teach K through 12, but so take that with a grain of salt. But it feels to me like what we need is maybe a fusion of the two. Like, this idea that it's one or the other is maybe not right, but it feels like the idea that you could use really interesting things from data science to motivate learning these other more boring things for most students is a possibility. I personally think that what's hard in math education is that you've actually got many different pathways in that same program, many different kinds of students. So you need to have some stuff in there for the kids who are going to go to college and going to study math and are going to like ultimately become engineers or in STEM disciplines. They need something, and that may be much more math than everybody else needs. And then you've got some students who are like, I can tell I am not going to do this. So in that case, it becomes what do you need to be a citizen? Like what do you need to be a citizen? But also, are we closing off possibilities for you? And I think there's where
That's the sticky part right
that's
there.
the
That's the
sticky
sticky
part.
part.
That's
That's
the
the sticky
really
part
sticky
because
part.
the question is, does a 15 or 16 or even 17-year-old
Yeah.
really know yet what they want? And then are we breaking them out too early and saying,
Yes.
are you going to go and become an engineer? Oh, you're not. You don't need all this advanced math.
Exactly.
And then in 3 years from then, they end up as a freshman in college and they hear about astronomy. They're like, oh, that sounds amazing. Sorry, you can't do that. You
Can't
don't
do
have
it.
the fact. And so
That's exactly.
yep.
I think that's the problem. I think if we were, many European countries, it's more tracked like that. So if you just sort of decide at 14 which way to go, and you've got these different tracks, and I think we like in the US to keep things open, as long as
Mhm.
possible for people to sort of change their mind. But that's what makes it hard because, I could say if for certain, then you should go this path, and maybe you don't need more algebra and geometry. You just need some classes that are focused on like real math for real life, like, how to balance your checkbook kind of stuff.
Is that the reason that you said that these folks are kind of fighting over this right now? Is it because it can affect your future and your career so much, or is there like other, oh, if you're in STEM, if you're in math, then you unlock this and that and da 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 da.
Yeah, it's access to the most kind of powerful pathways in
Yeah.
STEM, right? So I studied engineering when I was in college, and like in order to get into a good engineering program, things may have changed a little bit, but pretty much the standard is you better have taken calculus in high school, and you
Mm-hmm.
better have done well in calculus. Like that's
Yeah,
the most
I think that's
important thing
right.
they're looking at.
Mm.
And so then it's like a backwards design from there. Well, how do you end up in calculus in high school? Well, then you better have taken algebra at least by the eighth grade and done really well, such that you
Right.
can take geometry in the ninth grade,
Yeah.
such that you can take. But then like those slots in those classes are limited, and so now people are like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, and in Chicago and Evanston and across the country, that's where all of a sudden deep disparities, very striking
Mm-hmm.
disparities show up along the lines of gender, but also race. And so then it becomes, and then especially in school districts like Evanston, where it's a pretty good mix of kids, right? Like if you just like go to a school assembly, you're like, oh wow, this is like you see everyone. This is like United Nations, everyone. And then
Yeah.
when you go, and then like when the bell rings, and if you go into a particular classroom right now, like in 2024, it's like, wait a second, is this Evanston? Or why are all the kids in this one class black? Or why are all the kids in this other class white? I was just walking down the hallway, and so those like divisions in
Mm-hmm.
terms of which kids get access to the best stuff, that's where a lot of the politics come in. And then politicians start making decisions
Yep.
about, and the school board starts making decisions about how to make things more fair. And then some parents don't like that because they want, then it
I
gets
think what's
really muddy.
happened is it becomes very often like a one or the other. There's either tracking, which enables the kids at the top to get what they need, um, or there's everybody gets the same thing, which we're just going to make sure everybody takes the same track and there isn't any differentiation. And then that's maybe, I don't know, that's supposed to be better for more kids. um, and so we end up with these fights because it becomes a fight about the kid. Are these classes meant to select the best, or are these classes meant to educate everybody? And
Right.
the
That's
reality
the
is
question.
it probably needs to have both. Like there probably needs to be both in that system. That this dichotomous thinking of it's for everybody is the same or everybody is different is not working. There's got to be a way in there for there to be some more fluid pathways, but there probably need to be pathways. Like there are some kids who really like math and are
Mm-hmm.
really drawn to that area, and so, you need those pathways as much as you need at the same time to be balancing, making sure
That
that
sounds
all
like
kids get something.
Absolutely. And that sounds like one of those overlapping problems that you see in a lot of other areas in society, right? Because I don't want anybody to adjust the bar for my pilot when I'm flying to Miami. Like whatever the bar is to be a pilot or a plane mechanic, I want that exactly where it has been for me personally, right? Don't adjust the bar for any group of any people. But that being said, there's some people that can't get to the bar just because of who they are, where they come from. And, you know, there might be somebody on the south side of Chicago right now who's the greatest unknown hockey player ever. Chances of him ever getting to a hockey rink, slim to none. But I am on a path to always uncover the they. Like for what you was just talking about, Sepehr, who are, they, like when you're like, man, why is my car insurance so high? Because they taking all the money. Who are they? The they that are when you walk down the hallway and you're seeing everybody from all over the world, and then you go in the classroom, you go, oh, they did this. This was designed by them. Like, do we know who they are?
That's deep. That's deep.
It is deep. I don't want you to lose your job, Sepehr.
I mean, first of all, I think with respect to schools, I mean, we know we can figure out who the they is pretty easily. I mean, there's decision makers and how decisions get made. You kind of just break open the black box of public education. You know, there's a school board. There's a school board that makes really big decisions. There is, at the local level, there's the leadership of a school district, right? The superintendents and whatnot. So there's a lot of kind of power there locally. And then, or you can drill down to the level of like a classroom, right? And how like that story that you shared, Beth, around, being a professor and having, that overly confident white male student, like that's the social space of a classroom. And so teachers have a lot of power, professors have a lot of power in a sense of how to create a fair learning environment in their classes. So in that case, that they would be so at multiple levels, and so there's decisions being made at multiple levels that impact how fairly the opportunities to learn are distributed in any system. This is the kind of stuff that we geek out about in education. But I think underlying it, the point you raised, Beth, it's the philosophy of what public education should mean in a society. That's the thing that people don't name enough. And I think you named it like right on the nose. It's like, what is this for? Right? Like, are schools to prepare citizens so that citizens can make informed decisions about whether or not they get vaccines and, if they should vaccinate their kids and how to vote? And is that the purpose of a public education? Or is it to, create a very tight and narrow pipeline into the tech industry such that we can be competitive with China, right? Like I think if we don't name the goals, and I think to your point, it's all of the above, and we have to sort of like keep all the goals in the air. But and fairness isn't like, sometimes people say it's not about like fair. Society isn't fair. Schools aren't fair. But I was reminded this whole time we've been talking, I couldn't get this bit from I think it was Chris Rock. I saw it. I can't remember what special it was, but he made this point of like being a parent. He's like, man, I hate these orientations you got to go to as parents when they just lie to all the kids. Like you can be anything you want to be. He's like, when I talk to kids, if I'm invited into a high school, I look out and I say, statistically speaking, a third of you are going to be Uber drivers. And and he's like. And like, there's some truth to that, right? In the sense of like, not everyone is gonna, but I think from a parent's perspective, from an education research perspective, I think Beth and I probably would agree on this. It's like the job we have, the responsibility we have to kids, at least before they're 18 years old, is to give them as much of a fair shake to attaining and reaching their full potential. Knowing that potential is not evenly distributed, but we can't just do a shoulder shrug. No, like we have to figure out how to, with kids with learning disabilities, we can't just give up on them. No, like that's a huge area of significance and interest in education? Like, how do you design curriculum and learning and classrooms and schools such that if you have a child with severe learning disabilities, they still get a quality education, they still get cultivated, and of my cultivation of mind, of spirit. And so what is that speaking to? That's speaking to, like, I think this, a compassionate society that really cares, but not everyone sees it like that.
Yeah. And I would like to add, so what is my job as a statistician in this? Because, a lot of this is just my personal philosophy or the things I've learned over time being involved in projects but, I just gave you two visions, right? I said, well, one vision is that we should be using education to identify the best kids, right? And that's what we're doing with math. We need to really make pathways for the best kids to make it to the top. And another vision is that what we're trying to do is make sure everybody gets a good education, or that we can get more kids up. If we, instead of tracking them, if we make everybody take the same thing, we can actually increase these. Those are two theories, is what they are. They're theories, like they're theories of how the world should work or could work. And we could argue all day, right, about one versus the other. And if it's, well, should it be this or should it be that? My job as a statistician in this is usually to say, well, okay, those are your ideas of how the world works. Do they actually work that way? Like, how would we collect data to know if they actually work that way, if your theory is true? So if your theory is that the best way to teach kids is to put them all in the same classes and to not differentiate, and that by doing so, you're going to raise up the kids who normally wouldn't make it to algebra are going to make it to algebra because you did that. And the kids who were already going to be in algebra are going to be just fine. We could actually test that, right? Like, that's an intervention to make education like that versus tracking kids from the time they start at certain grades and making them go in different pathways. Those are two different theories of how we get to an end goal. And we can actually collect data and compare data in various ways in order to say which one is true. Like, is it true that if you give everybody the exact same education, the exact same classes, that at the end of the day, the kids who would have been kind of at the bottom end of the distribution or whatever, I'm using air quotes here, will be better off than they would have been otherwise. And the kids who would have been already at the top, air quotes again, are going to be just fine. It's a theory that we could actually test. And very often our theories are wrong, is what happens. Like, very often what we think will happen when we make changes to systems, because they're complex systems, we don't take into account that parents have their own behavior that they do, that they take in, that they use the system in various ways or opt out of the system. We don't take into account all sorts of compensatory behaviors that occur. And it may turn out that, like, what sounded great doesn't actually work. That's usually my role, which means that, like, being a statistician can be a fairly unpopular job. You're right. Yeah. It's like you're not very fun because all you're ever telling people is like, well,
technically that's not really
statistically speaking.
But even what you were just saying, but like what came to mind, like, and I'm wondering, because even with or math in general, like, you can, if we're calling a spade, in my mind, I could think of a couple of cultures where it feels like culturally math and science and technology is on the forefront of, like, you come home, you might as well have never left school. Like, your folks got a curriculum for you at home. Like, there's so many variables, and there might be kid X from wherever, and he comes home and it's not necessarily like that. Like, his parents are like, hey, is that math stuff still going good? Yeah, Pop, fantastic. Yeah, But does and this is a question maybe for both of you, Sepehr and Beth. In my mind, there's a big difference between intelligent and smart, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Sam Bankman-Fried was intelligent, but he wasn't all that smart. Mike Tyson, he's not all that intelligent, perhaps, but he's smart. He's one of the smartest people in his field, and he has to think under pressure. So do they make that same determination for things? And, like, can you see a kid and be like, oh yeah, he's gonna get 128% out of 100, but he forgets that the pencil is behind his ear? Like he's not not
Yeah.
necessarily the smartest lad. He might be somewhat of a square, but you know, is there a difference? Do I even make sense? Like,
Yeah.
isn't there a difference between like smart and intelligent?
Mike, have you been sitting on graduate admissions committees? Because that sounds exactly like what graduate admission committees are, right? Like it's like, you know,
Imagine if I found that out about Mike at this stage of like our friendship. That, like
If I was
actually, yes,
if I was a secret
actually,
dean, not the secret millionaire, I was
he's like,
oh my
he's like,
God.
actually, I've been choosing who gets to make it in society. And I'm just wanting to check myself on this. I think that's actually really, really, I mean, that's also a fundamental tension in education research, right? Like historically, there's been all of this like ranking of kids on scores of various things. And I just want to put an aside there, which is that is the field of measurement, which is not statistics. So I don't want to like take responsibility for intelligence for intelligence testing and scoring.
Real
problems.
Stuff, Mike. It's
a real one, yeah. But you know, I think we use them a lot in schools, and then the question becomes like, you can teach the test, you can become really good at test taking, and yet can you think in like a facile way? Can you, just because you can do well on test, does that mean you're creative? Because I think what you're talking about with smart is like a much more complex combination of sort of creativity, agile thinking, like awareness of the world, like people skills. Like you're right, they're not the same thing. And I often am thinking
and those aren't being measured. Those things aren't being measured.
Much harder to measure.
I know some people in the hood that would never touch class, haven't touched class since their early teens, and they're some of the smartest people you've ever seen. I used to work construction back in the day, and there was this guy, he had no two front teeth, lived in the trailer with his girlfriend. You can ask him any math question, like you could throw, what's 128 times 54.35, and he'll give it to you in 4 seconds. But he just worked construction and looked like somebody you wouldn't trust with your car.
And yet, like, isn't it sad? It sounds like he's got all the skills necessary to do something great and is not getting to use that, right? Like our society doesn't benefit. Yeah, and then the other time we end up with some students who are really good at tests, who are just really narrow thinkers, who are like, I stay on the narrow, I do what's right, like I'm not going to question it. I just sort of like do my task.
And the problem, not to be a downer, but the problem with our education system is that it's not. First of all, it's not even sifting and trying to find, you know, those like people in the hood, like you mentioned, Mike, who have that like natural. It's not even cultivating that. It's more grooming people to do well on a particular test. Well, who can do well on the test? Typically kids of privilege who have parents who can get tutoring. So all of a sudden the kids who are being deemed and stamped as the smartest in society and going to are just the kids who've been like literally like, you know, spoon fed their grade. So you're not getting, and that's the other kind of invitation and kind of project of public education is like, how are we really tapping into the brilliance of young people, and are we currently doing that with the way that we sequence courses and measure and then, you know, make them so these are all the open questions that quickly devolve into like, you know, food fights at the cafeteria. Like these are the things that
and I'll throw into now that I've added in graduate admissions in there, because I think this is like exactly the problem there. So if we know that the test, if we think like, well, maybe the test is not testing the same thing. Like, I don't know if that, you know, if I'm using the GRE, if that's actually testing smartness, it's testing intelligence, but I want smartness. One argument would be to get rid of the GRE, would be to say, well, we don't need that test anymore because it's not testing the right thing. And that's been something that people have proposed since COVID, right? Getting rid of the GRE, getting rid of the SAT. And this is, again, a question as a statistician where my question is, okay, but what's the alternative? And is the alternative more fair? Because, we can agree that probably it's not completely fair to use a test alone to make a decision. But when we take the test out, well, what are the other ways that people get admitted to programs or get selected? Well, they write essays about things. Okay, well, those, you know, we don't know now with ChatGPT if they really wrote the essay or if they hired somebody to write the essay, if they're rich. What about letters of recommendation? Well, what do we know about letters of recommendation? Letters of recommendation have all of these biases in them, and we trust more letters of recommendation from people that we know. So that means that like the people's letters that we trust are like actually privileged, are the more privileged people. We don't trust letters from people we don't know. So like you work through all of these different systems and you realize like actually none of them are great. And so the question of if at the end of the day we want to select more for smartness than intelligence at the end in anything, how do we actually do that? We can drop a test score, we can change this, but how would we know if we were successful at it? How would you know if we were getting more of the smart people, or a more diverse set of people even in? And does changing this, getting rid of a test or changing the admissions process in some way actually meet that goal? And very often what we find is they don't. That's what's so frustrating, right? It can be frustrating that we can see a problem with something that exists. We propose that we're going to change it in some way because that's surely going to work better. And then it's really depressing when you find out that it actually didn't do the changes that you wanted.
Oh, wow. Because it takes longer for it to play out for you to figure it out, right? Because if somebody goes through military training and then Navy SEAL training and they're the top of the top of the top, and then as soon as it gets time to really boogie and the bullets start flying and they freeze up and you're like, oh, well, you find out immediately right then. They kind of get taken out the game. But if it's math, it takes a while to go, oh, they're freezing, like they're not able to handle all the extra
that's part of it, but also like our world adapts, right? Like if you just think like every time we try to reduce inequality or deal with equity, there are still they're at the same time. It's not like the system is the same and we changed one variable, right? Like we've changed something and other people adapt in various ways. So as soon as you say, oh, test scores aren't going to be the way that you get in, then the same people who normally would have had kids who did well on test scores are now going to double down on their letters of recommendation, right? And they're going to game that system in some way. So there's ways in which the privileged are always able to adapt in these situations pretty quickly. And so actually outsmarting the people with the most privilege is the hardest.
I'm wondering, because it always gets, if I remember back to my school times, you'll hear like statistically speaking, America is what's the out of 30 countries, America's 37 when it comes to math, or whatever, or it's almost kind of an Olympic style pose off when it comes to like math and science and all those other things. When we're looking at this, what's the motivation to get these right, to have us on the forefront when it comes to math? Like we have computers now. My phone's got a calculator. I can ask ChatGPT like the word question. Technically, it feels like, all right, maybe it's not such a big deal anymore. Math it's available for everybody. But it's anytime that I hear about it, it is America being compared, our test scores being compared to this country or that place or that place. Why is the fight still there to say, hey, this is important for us, even though technology is like, I'll give you the answer. You don't need to worry about it.
Well, it's funny because you just named a whole lot of technology that needs people with STEM field degrees to create it.
To build.
Like you're right. I can rely on my calculator because somebody made the phone, right? Somebody made that phone. Somebody made the app. Somebody, and then you think like, well, what goes into that? Well, there's a lot of PhDs involved in that. There's a lot of designers and people with, all sorts of different kinds of degrees going into that. And so that's the argument, I think, is all of the technology you just said, we actually need people who can make those technologies and not just hold them steady where they are right now, but continue to push. I think the larger question of the US versus other countries is like a much more socio-political kind of problem of like world dominance and do you want the phones to be made here? Do you want the phones to be made elsewhere? Like, do you want who gets to have the weapons? I mean, these global races are always very hard for me to kind of wrap my head around because I think they're not really just about education. They're much more like political things about the the economy in various places.
But just one irony, and it's a really, really interesting question, Mike, around this question of why math, if we have the technology, and why is America always ranking so low? I think the tests that you mentioned, they're called TIMS, right? So Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. I don't know how many, if it's once a year, once every couple of years, but the National Center for Education Statistics puts on this study to compare, like, how does the U.S. do in relation to, and you're right, we're usually far down the list when it comes to how the kids in the U.S. are doing compared to other countries, and yet somehow we are the STEM powerhouse of the world, right? Somehow we're the AI.
Somebody's fluffing the numbers.
So or we've relied on foreign talent. And we have an immigration system that allows people like my parents. That's literally the story of how my parents came to the U.S. They came here to study higher ed and STEM, and that's the way that America has maintained its dominance in science and technology, despite how crappy our public education system is. So it's not like that's a really interesting like contradiction in the system. Is that like we're literally like, the iPhone, all of the AI innovation, we're leading the world right now, and a lot of that is not coming from people who went through the schools in America. And so it's going to be one of the things I'm really interested to see what happens with this new administration is how they're going to really think about immigration. Like, is the racism that is at the heart of the Republican Party so stupid that they become, self-harming to the interests of the American project? Or are they going to say, wait a second, we can't be that racist because we actually need, we need this steady flow of talent. I'm gonna be keeping my eyes on that. Like, how is the question around immigration? Because it ties in to the tech question and to the education question. So one of many things to keep our eyes on, I guess. As we head to the end of the interview, we want to be mindful of your time, Beth, and we really appreciate the conversation. But we got to ask you one question related to the incoming administration and how you, as a professor with expertise in statistics, and really with a focus on the role of evidence and how we as a society make decisions, what's on your mind? What's on your heart? What are you thinking about and worrying about, and just kind of keeping track of as the new administration comes on the scene?
Wow. Okay. Well, so this is where my thinking is very dark. Like, I feel like since November 6th, I've been in like a dark place about this. Like, what do you do when your entire job, your entire career is about using evidence to make decisions, and an administration is coming in that sort of signals we don't really care about evidence. We actually don't really care about knowing what works, knowing what works. We want to make decisions. We don't believe that science and evidence matter. And so it's a depressing realization. I've done a lot of work over time in the field of education, thinking about how you design these systems of how we do studies, helping people think about how to get more diverse representation in studies, how to be more careful in our research, and to be in a moment where you think, like, what if they don't fund research in this area anymore? What if they don't, what if funding in education in general plummets? What if all the things that we know are devalued? Like, what is my job in that system? And so I think it's really tough. I mean, it's a very hard problem. A lot of the ways we talk about things in politics now are beliefs about how things should be, right? We should do this, we should do that, this is how it should be. And they're very, I mean, as I've said, most of our ideas about how the world should work or how we can change the world are not what we think, are not true. Like, most of them are not true. And the only way we know that is when we collect data and measure data and evaluate things And I think we're entering a period where people don't want to do that. So you can make a lot of claims and have a lot of fake news and like made up things if you don't actually have data to go with it. You can just say it's true. There's no checks and balances on it. The nice thing about a well-designed, scientific study is that or evaluation of something is that it's transparent. That like, I can say this is what I did the study, I designed it, here's what the results were, but also here you can have all of the information and you can see that for yourself. I think that's not the way the system is, the incoming administration is going to operate. It's going to be a lot more like, this is what we believe to be true about the world, and therefore we're going to act this way, but we're not going to invest in actually knowing if it's true. So I'm worried. I'm truly like deeply worried. Like the thing that I do best in the world, the thing I know how to do, is ultimately devalued at this moment in time. People don't care as much about knowing what's real or not real.
Well,
in
Beth,
the way
we
that
care.
I think of it.
We care, and I care, and Mike cares, and PCWB cares, and no, really,
I gotta head to the Mirage in 2 months, and I need some like a little cheat sheet on the blackjack. And I might
Mike is not letting that.
You're so hopeful that I'm just like, I love that. You're like, I know she knows. She's keeping it to herself.
She has the secret. A squared plus B squared equals jackpot. Let's get to it.
No, this has been great, Beth. It's really great to be your colleague, and thank you for jumping on this show with us. I'm looking forward to getting coffee again with you at Who's Your Mama on Chicago Street. Shout out Who's Your Mama. That's the coffee shop of choice. When Beth and I meet and talk shop and parenting and AI and everything else, and I think we're due for our next one pretty soon.
We sure are.
Tell you what, and before we get out of here, Beth, like I actually literally I'll sometimes go on like the FBI page to look up numbers on certain things. I like to try and I'm interested in stuff, right? Is there an overall catch-all if I was interested in like, all right, what's the statistics on what's the likelihood of is there like a Google or a big site or something like that you find interesting, something that you might use?
Well, I don't know that there's one single site, but this is where I'm scared to say this, because I would historically say you should go to the government websites. That's what the statisticians in government do, is we try to make sure that the data has good quality and it's trustworthy. So if you were interested in education data, I would send you to the Institute of Education Science and National Center of Education Statistics. If you were interested in labor statistics, I'd send you to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I think a real concern that statisticians in government have is, how do we protect the data quality so that it's real and it's trustworthy? Because that's really what we care about, that you should be able to have transparent data. Like, you should be able to go and see the real numbers and not fake numbers. So I would normally say the government, and I hope that continues to be true.
You think there's still some real soldiers, statistic soldiers in the government?
There are a lot of real statistic soldiers. They're super nerdy and they are wringing their hands about small details, and they are like
those are the soldiers you want.
Those are the soldiers you want. But we do know that in countries that get taken over by dictators or fascist governments, that people start to lie with government data. The government starts manipulating the data. And so I think these are the soldiers, like, these people are real soldiers in trying to like hold down that the data that we have as a government about our people and our community is real and true and not being manipulated.
Good to know.
We salute those soldiers, and we salute you, Professor Tipton. Hey everybody, this has been yet another episode of PCWB, a professor and a comedian walk into a bar. I'm your co-host, Sepehr Vakil.
And I'm your co-host, Michael Knight.
Thank you so much, Beth. Please, everyone, subscribe and share, and we'll talk soon.